Some wounds never truly heal. They just become part of who you are, like the lines on my weathered hands or the silver threading through what's left of my hair. My name is Margaret, and this isn't just my story, it's the story of my grandchildren and how I failed them when they needed me most. I've spent decades wondering if sharing this would help or hurt, if the words would bring healing or simply reopen scars that have finally smoothed into something we can live with. But as I approach my 83rd birthday, I've realized that silence protects only the wrong people. My daughter would have wanted me to speak. She always said truth was the only gift that mattered. The mind plays tricks as you age. I forget where I've put my glasses, miss appointments, call people by the wrong names. But trauma etches itself differently in memory. What happened after we lost my daughter, Hannah, remains crystal clear, every detail preserved like insects in amber, suspended in time, waiting to be examined. Even now, I can close my eyes and see it all unfold again. The funeral flowers wilting in the summer heat, the children's bewildered faces, and him smiling, helpful, deadly, stepping into our broken lives with such perfect timing. They say the most dangerous predators are the ones who look like helpers, the ones who offer a steady hand when you're drowning in grief. The ones who know exactly what to say, how to position themselves, how to make their control feel like care. I should have recognized the signs. Perhaps, deep down, I did but chose not to see them. That's the question that haunts my nights still. Did I miss the warnings, or did I ignore them because acknowledging them was too frightening? What happened to my grandchildren after their mother died haunts our family still. It's a story about trust betrayed by blood, about a wolf who came dressed as salvation, and about children who paid the price for adult blindness. Most of all, it's about how evil doesn't announce itself with convenient warning signs. It smiles, offers help, and waits patiently for you to turn away. I was 70 when Hannah died, old enough to know better, young enough to have protected them. Instead, I became an unwitting accomplice in their suffering. Every time I stepped aside, every document I signed without reading, every concern I dismissed, each was a brick in the wall that eventually separated me from Noah and Lily. By the time I realized what was happening, that wall had become nearly impossible to breach. This story isn't easy to tell. There are parts that shame me still, moments when I failed so completely that forgiveness seems an undeserved grace. But it needs telling, because the patterns of predatory behavior that ensnared us are repeated in families everywhere. Because children are being isolated, manipulated, and harmed by people who should protect them. Because the warning signs are so often masked as kindness until it's too late. My grandchildren gave me permission to tell this story. They're grown now, with children of their own. They say sharing might help another family recognize the shadows before they grow too dark, identify the danger before it takes root. They have more courage than I did, more wisdom, too. They've learned to speak when something feels wrong, to trust their instincts, to name their fears aloud rather than bury them beneath politeness and doubt. If you're listening to this and something in your life feels wrong, a relationship that isolates you, a helper who seems too eager, a situation where power feels unbalanced, I hope our story gives you permission to question, to look closer, to speak up before silence becomes its own kind of prison. So, I'll start where all nightmares do on an ordinary day, when everything still seemed safe. Before we knew that safety was an illusion we could no longer afford. Before cancer took my daughter Hannah, our family knew happiness. Not perfect happiness. Hannah was a single mother working 2 jobs, but there was so much love in that small house. I lived 15 minutes away, close enough to help with the children, but far enough to give them their own space to grow as their own little family unit. Our routines were simple but sacred. Every Sunday, they'd come for dinner without fail. Noah would help me in the garden, his small hands learning to tell weeds from seedlings, while Lily set the table exactly as her mother had taught her: forks on the left, knife and spoon on the right, napkins folded into triangles. Hannah would arrive last, often with the weight of her week visible in the slope of her shoulders, exhausted, but always with that smile that lit up her eyes when she saw us all together. "Mom," she'd say, hugging me tight enough that I could feel her heartbeat against mine, "whatever you're cooking smells like heaven." The children would race to her, wrapping themselves around her legs until she laughed and lifted them for proper hugs. Even on her most tired days, she always found energy for those embraces. Weekday mornings, I'd often arrive at their house before dawn with fresh muffins or oatmeal, helping get the children ready for school while Hannah prepared for her first shift. In the afternoons, the kids would sometimes wait at my house until Hannah finished work. We'd bake cookies, tend the garden, or read stories piled together on my old sofa. Those ordinary moments, homework at my kitchen table, bath time splashes, bedtime stories, were the foundation of our world. We were comfortable in our routines, in the knowing of one another's rhythms and needs. Their father had left when Noah was 3 and Lily barely walking. Hannah never spoke ill of him in front of the children, just said some people weren't meant for family life. She was strong that way, never bitter, always looking forward. In private, she'd sometimes confess her fears to me. Was she enough for them? Would they resent growing up without a father? I'd remind her of how their eyes followed her around the room, how they bloomed under her attention. She was their whole world, and she filled it completely. The children were 7 and 9 when Hannah first noticed the fatigue. "Always tired," she said, brushing it off. "Probably just working too hard, needing more iron, maybe fighting a virus that wouldn't quite leave." She'd rest when she could, taking rare naps on Sunday afternoons while the children and I played board games or went for walks. By the time we understood what was happening inside her body, the silent, merciless spread of cells multiplying where they shouldn't, it was already writing its own ending. 6 months. That's how long it took from diagnosis to the day I watched them lower my daughter into the ground. 6 months of hospital rooms that smelled of antiseptic and fear. 6 months of the children's confused faces, trying to understand why Mommy was disappearing before their eyes, why her hair fell out, why she couldn't pick them up anymore, why doctors spoke in whispers outside her door. 6 months of schedules rebuilt around treatments that made her sicker, of Noah learning to make simple meals, of Lily sleeping with her mother's sweater when Hannah had to stay overnight at the hospital. I moved in during those final months, sleeping on their couch to maintain some sense of normalcy in the children's lives. We created a schedule around Hannah's good days, celebrating small victories, when she could join us for dinner at the table, when she felt well enough to help Lily with her reading, when she could sit outside and feel the sun on her face while Noah showed her his science project. We preserved those moments in photographs, in stories, in memories we could hold later. Hannah planned for them as best she could between treatments and pain. She had a modest life insurance policy through her main job. The house wasn't paid for, but there was enough to keep them there for a while if we were careful. She made lists of things I should know. Lily's fear of the dark, Noah's asthma triggers, their favorite bedtime stories, which clothes were special, what traditions mattered most. She recorded videos for birthdays and graduations she knew she wouldn't see. She made memory boxes for each child, filled with letters and small treasures. And she made me promise to raise them in their home, with their memories surrounding them. "Don't let them forget me," she whispered the night before she died, her hand barely strong enough to squeeze mine, her voice a ghost of what it had been. "Tell them stories. Show them my pictures. Tell them how every single day they were the reason I smiled. Mom, promise me they'll know how much I loved them." I promised. I meant it with everything in me. I would be the keeper of her memory, the extension of her love. I would make sure her children grew up knowing the extraordinary woman who had given them life, who had fought to stay with them until her body simply couldn't fight anymore. But grief does strange things to judgment. It clouds what should be clear as day. It makes you vulnerable in ways you can't see until it's too late. It makes you reach for help when perhaps you should stand firm. It makes promises feel impossible to keep alone. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and casseroles. Noah stood so still beside me, refusing to cry, his small hand gripping his sister's. Lily sobbed until she fell asleep in my arms. So many people came. Hannah had been loved by many, including her half-brother, Richard. I'd never been close with my stepson. He was the product of my second marriage to a man who'd died years before. Richard lived across the country, busy with his own life. Hannah mentioned him occasionally, but they weren't close. Yet there he was at the funeral, solemn and helpful, arranging chairs, making calls, taking charge when I could barely remember to breathe. "Don't worry about a thing, Margaret," he said, his arm around my shoulders. "Family takes care of family. I'll help with the kids until you find your footing." I should have asked why. I should have wondered about this sudden appearance, this newfound dedication to family he'd barely acknowledged. But grief made me grateful instead of suspicious. The first night alone in their house was the hardest. Noah had nightmares, crying out for his mother. Lily crawled into my bed, her little body shaking with sobs. I held them both until dawn broke, wondering how I would possibly be enough for them. Richard called the next morning. He'd taken an extended leave from work. He could stay a while to help sort Hannah's affairs, he said. He knew about insurance claims and estate matters. "You focus on the children," he told me. "Let me handle the paperwork. It's the least I can do for Hannah." The first changes were so subtle I barely noticed. Richard suggested I stay at my own house some nights. "To keep it lived in," he said. He'd stay with the children, give me a break. Then came the concerns about my age, my health. Was I really up to raising 2 active children at 70? Wouldn't it be better if he helped more permanently? "Hannah would want them to have a younger influence," he said, voice smooth as silk. "A man's influence too." Before I realized what was happening, Richard had moved into the spare room. He was driving the children to school, attending parent-teacher conferences, managing Hannah's bank accounts. And I was visiting my grandchildren in what was once my daughter's home, visiting like a stranger. Looking back, I can see how he did it. Step by step, inch by inch. Creating distance so gradually, I didn't feel myself being pushed away until there was an ocean between us. By the time I recognized the danger, he'd already rewritten our family story, and the children were calling him Uncle Rich, the man who rescued them after Mommy died. There's something especially cruel about manipulation that wears the mask of kindness. Richard had a way of making his control seem like care, his restrictions like protection, his interference like support. He smiled too much. That's what I remember now, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "The children need structure," he'd say, implementing new rules about when I could visit. "They're confused enough without different authority figures telling them different things." The first items disappeared around 3 months after the funeral. Small things from Hannah's bedroom, her favorite scarf, the perfume bottle she'd kept on her dresser, the earrings she wore on special occasions. When I asked about them, Richard suggested the children might have moved them. "Kids process grief in strange ways," he said. "They're probably hiding mementos." But it wasn't the children. I would later discover that Richard had methodically removed evidence of Hannah from the house. Photographs vanished from walls. Her clothes donated without consulting me. Her recipe books that I'd planned to share with Lily someday gone. "It's too painful for them to see these reminders everywhere," he explained when I confronted him. The therapist suggested a clean break. There was no therapist. That was another lie. Isolation came next. The children's activities suddenly conflicted with my usual visiting times. Their friends' parents, whom I'd known for years, were told I was struggling with my health and shouldn't be bothered. The neighbor who'd been like family was politely informed that the children needed space from excess visitors. One by one, the connections that could have raised alarms were severed. 6 months after Hannah died, Richard suggested selling my house. "You barely stay there anymore," he reasoned. "We could build a small apartment behind this house with the money. You'd be close, but still have independence." It sounded sensible through my grief-fogged mind. Practical. By the time the sale was final, Richard had changed his tune. "The apartment would need to wait," he said. "Market conditions. Building costs. Perhaps next year." I moved into a small rental across town, using what was left after Richard invested much of my home's proceeds for the children's college funds. Investments I would never see documentation for, despite asking. The financial control extended to Hannah's estate, too. Richard had somehow become executor paperwork I signed in those early, hazy days of grief. The life insurance policy intended to provide for the children was now in a trust he controlled. The house payments were his responsibility. "I've got it handled," became his mantra whenever I asked questions. You don't need to worry yourself over these details. But I did worry, especially when Noah began withdrawing into himself. My grandson had been outgoing, quick to laugh. Now he flinched at sudden movements and had stopped playing baseball, which he'd loved. Growing pains, Richard said dismissively. Boys get moody at this age. Noah was 8. Lily changed too. My bright, chatty granddaughter became watchful, measuring her words. She stopped asking to spend nights at my apartment. When I brought it up, she looked at Richard before answering. Uncle Rich says you need your rest, Grandma, she recited, as if reading from a script. We're a lot to handle. I noticed other things too. How Richard would create reasons to touch the children, a hand lingering too long on a shoulder, arms wrapped around them when they clearly stiffened. The way he insisted on helping Lily bathe, though she was well past needing assistance. She might slip, he said when I objected. Safety first. I should have known then. I should have seen. But Richard had built a wall of plausible explanations, and I kept trying to peer over it rather than tearing it down. The most painful memory comes from Noah's 9th birthday. I'd saved to buy him a model train set like the one Hannah had as a child. When I arrived for his small party, no friends, just us, Richard pulled me aside. He's too old for trains, he said. I've already gotten him a gaming system. Return yours. I didn't. I gave Noah the gift anyway, watched his eyes light up momentarily before darting nervously to his uncle. Richard took the train set that night after I left, telling Noah it would be safer in the attic until he was more responsible. It was never seen again. That night, alone in my apartment, I cried until there were no tears left. Something was deeply wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. Richard had answers for everything. Explanations that sounded reasonable on the surface. And who was I? Just an old woman who'd lost her daughter. Emotional, overprotective. Those were Richard's words for me now, spoken kindly but firmly to anyone who would listen. I began keeping a journal. Small incidents, changes in the children, things that disappeared. Richard's inconsistencies. Writing it down made the pattern clearer. This wasn't help, it was appropriation. This wasn't care, it was control. What I didn't know then, what would haunt me, were the things happening behind closed doors after I was sent home each night. The secret shielded by those two bright smiles and carefully managed visits. By the 1-year anniversary of Hannah's death, Richard had successfully accomplished what must have been his plan all along. My grandchildren were financially, physically, and emotionally under his control. And I had helped him do it. There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. For me, it was a rain-soaked Tuesday when Richard handed me an envelope. I've been appointed their legal guardian, he said, sliding the court papers across the kitchen table. It's official now. I stared at the documents, incomprehension giving way to horror. Pages of legal language confirming what Richard had orchestrated so carefully. He had petitioned for and been granted full guardianship of Noah and Lily. But I'm their grandmother, I said, voice barely a whisper. Hannah wanted me to raise them. Richard's smile never faltered. The court disagreed. You're almost 80, Margaret. Living alone. No income except Social Security. I have a career, a home they're already settled in. This is best for everyone. You planned this from the beginning. The realization made me physically ill. You never intended to help, you wanted to take them. He didn't deny it. Instead, he placed another document before me. Visitation agreement, he explained. You can see them twice a month. Supervised, of course. Supervised? By whom? By me. His eyes were cold now, the pretense falling away. Consider it generous. I could have requested no contact. The children were at school during this conversation. They had no idea their lives had been legally signed away to a man who was practically a stranger before their mother died. Why? I demanded. Why would you do this? Money, I assumed. Hannah's insurance, the house, my savings. But Richard's answer chilled me more than simple greed would have. They're mine now, he said softly. My family, my children. I left in a daze, the visitation agreement unsigned. I called a lawyer that afternoon, using money I couldn't afford. The consultation lasted 15 minutes. "You'd have an extremely difficult case," she said gently. "The guardianship has been granted. Your age works against you. His income and housing stability work for him. And most importantly, he's been their primary caregiver for the past year. Because he manipulated the situation. That would be nearly impossible to prove. I'm sorry." I tried 2 more lawyers. Same answer. Without evidence of abuse or neglect, the courts wouldn't likely overturn a guardianship that appeared, on paper, to be in the children's best interest. I signed the visitation agreement. What choice did I have? It was that or risk losing them completely. The first supervised visit was at a restaurant of Richard's choosing. Noah barely spoke. Lily cried when it was time to leave. Richard watched every interaction, noting when I mentioned Hannah or our past together. "Let's focus on the present," he suggested when I reminded the children of a trip we'd taken with their mother. "Dwelling on before only makes the adjustment harder." He was erasing Hannah from their lives. Erasing me, creating dependence by destroying their past. The visits grew more restricted. Richard began canceling at the last-minute illness, other plans, the children being too emotional after seeing me. 2 visits per month became 1. Then, every other month. Always with a plausible excuse. I was losing them. In desperation, I went to their school, hoping to see them during lunch or recess. The front office staff stopped me kindly but firmly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell. You're not on the approved visitor list. I'm their grandmother. I understand. But Mr. Richardson has legal custody, and he's provided specific instructions." I stood in the school parking lot and wept, not caring who saw. Later that day, Richard called. "If you try to see them without permission again," he said, voice eerily calm, "I'll file for a restraining order. Don't test me on this, Margaret." Without regular contact, the changes in my grandchildren accelerated. When I did see them, Noah had grown reed-thin and jumpy. Lily, once so affectionate, kept physical distance between us. Both had circles under their eyes that children should never have. Richard had answers ready. Growing pains, school stress. They missed their mother. After one visit, as I hugged Lily goodbye, she whispered something that kept me awake for weeks. "Uncle Rich says you're too old to remember us anyway." I realized then that he was poisoning them against me too. Making them believe I was forgetting them, that I didn't want them, that I couldn't care for them. The truth was opposite. I remembered everything. Their favorite foods, the stories they loved. How Noah slept with one foot sticking out from under the blanket. How Lily hummed when she was happy. I remembered their mother in their expressions, their gestures. I carried them with me always. But Richard was constructing a new reality, and I was powerless to break through it. By the time they'd been under his guardianship for a year, I had been reduced to a peripheral figure in their lives. A monthly visitor, contingent on Richard's mood and whims. My daughter's children, my flesh and blood, had been stolen as surely as if they'd been kidnapped. And, like a kidnapping victim, they were being conditioned to forget their past life, to depend only on their captor, to believe his version of reality. The worst part was knowing that whatever I was seeing during these controlled visits was only the surface. What happened in that house when no one was watching? What new rules, new expectations, new family dynamics had Richard created? I began parking down the street sometimes, watching the house. The curtains were always drawn. Richard's car often the only one in the driveway for days at a time. The children stopped attending their previous activities. No more baseball for Noah, no dance classes for Lily, no play dates that I could observe. They were disappearing behind those walls. And I, the woman who had promised my dying daughter I would protect them, could only stand outside looking in, wondering what secrets were being created in the home that should have been their sanctuary. Some truths are unbearable. They sit like stones in your stomach, too heavy to digest, too painful to ignore. What happened behind closed doors in that house would be one of those truths, one I wouldn't learn in full until much later. But I began to see glimpses, fragments of a nightmare taking shape. It started with a missed visit. Richard called that morning. "Noah's not feeling well," he said. "Best to reschedule." Something in his voice, a tension, a falseness made me push back. "I'll bring soup," I offered. "I won't stay long." A pause. "That's not necessary." "I insist." For once I held firm. "I'll be there at noon." When I arrived, Richard answered the door with clear reluctance. Noah was on the couch, a blanket pulled to his chin despite the warm day. His face was pallid, eyes downcast. "Just a stomach bug," Richard said, hovering as I sat beside my grandson. "Probably best not to get too close." I reached for Noah's hand where it lay on top of the blanket. He flinched, then winced as though the sudden movement hurt. "Can I see Grandma alone?" Noah asked unexpectedly. Richard's face hardened momentarily before smoothing into concern. "You need rest, buddy. Grandma understands." "Just 5 minutes," I pressed, sensing something crucial. "I won't tire him out." With visible reluctance, Richard stepped into the kitchen, though I knew he'd be listening. The moment he was out of sight, Noah's eyes filled with tears. "I fell," he whispered, "down the stairs. It was an accident." But his eyes told a different story. And when he shifted, the blanket slipped, revealing what he'd been hiding. Fingerprint bruises on his wrists. Defensive bruises. The kind you get when someone grabs you too hard, when you try to pull away. My heart stopped. "Noah." "It was an accident," he repeated, louder this time, clearly meant for Richard's ears. "I was running in the house. I'm not supposed to run in the house." Before I could respond, Richard reappeared with a glass of water and pills. "Medicine time," he announced. "You should probably go, Margaret. We don't want you catching anything." I left in a daze, my mind racing. Those weren't stair injuries. I'd seen enough falls in my life to know the difference. The next morning, I called Child Protective Services. The social worker who answered was professional but skeptical. I had no photographs, no doctor's reports. Just the word of an elderly woman who admittedly had a contentious relationship with the children's legal guardian. "We'll look into it," she promised, but without more concrete evidence. 3 days later, I received a call from the same social worker. "We visited the home," she explained. "Both children denied any abuse or mistreatment. Noah showed us where he tripped on the stairs. Richard provided medical records from an urgent care visit that documented the accident. Everything appears to be in order." Medical records. Richard had covered his tracks, and the children trained, perhaps threatened, had stuck to the story. My complaint went nowhere. Worse, Richard used it to further restrict my access. "You're obviously looking to cause trouble," he told me on the phone afterward. "I think we need a break from visits until you can accept the situation." 2 months passed without seeing them. 2 months of sleepless nights, of imagining what might be happening. I called the school, only to discover the children had been transferred to a new location not disclosed to me. In desperation, I went to the police, explaining my suspicions. The officer was sympathetic but blunt. "Without evidence, our hands are tied. The children have a legal guardian who, by all official accounts, is providing proper care. I'm sorry." It was during this period that I became acquainted with my own helplessness, a special kind of hell. To suspect harm to those you love and be unable to intervene is torture beyond description. When Richard finally allowed another visit, it was at a public park. Neutral territory, safe from prying eyes inside the house. The children had changed again. Noah, now 10, had an automaton quality to his movements. Responding to Richard's subtle cues, a cleared throat, a tilted head with immediate obedience. Lily, 8, shadowed her brother, rarely speaking unless spoken to. "Are you being good for your uncle?" I asked, the inadequacy of the question burning my throat. They nodded in unison. "And school? Do you like your new school?" Lily looked at Richard before answering. "It's nice. The teachers are nice." Everything was nice. Every answer careful, rehearsed. No spontaneity, no complaints, no truths. As we walked toward the playground, Lily stumbled slightly. Her sleeve rode up, revealing marks on her forearm, thin, parallel lines that looked like scratch marks. Self-inflicted, I would later learn. A child's desperate attempt to control something, anything, in her environment. That night, alone in my apartment, I wrote everything down. The bruises, the behavioral changes, the isolation, the supervised conversations. When I looked at it all laid out, the pattern was unmistakable. But pattern isn't proof. And without proof, I remained powerless. I began researching obsessively. Child abuse, grooming behaviors, signs of trauma. Everything I read confirmed my fears. Richard fit the profile of certain types of abusers. Isolate, control, condition, threaten, create dependency, establish fear, remove support systems. Knowledge brought clarity but not solutions. I was an outsider now, kept at arm's length by legal barriers and Richard's careful manipulation. The next visit was canceled because the children had come down with something. The one after that because of school commitments. Excuses piled up like snow, burying my access deeper and deeper. 3 more months passed. When I finally saw them again, it was Christmas Eve a visit. Richard couldn't reasonably deny without raising questions. Lily had lost weight, her holiday dress hanging off her small frame. Noah's eyes were vacant, his responses mechanical. Neither showed interest in the presents I'd brought. Richard hovered, as always, directing the conversation, ensuring nothing of substance was discussed. As they prepared to leave, I hugged each child, whispering the same message. I love you. I'm trying. I won't stop trying. Noah squeezed my hand slightly, the only acknowledgement. That night, alone with my Christmas tree and uneaten dinner, I made a decision. If the system wouldn't help these children, I would find another way. Legal or not. I began planning. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that events were already in motion that would crack Richard's carefully constructed facade. That the secrets kept so tightly controlled would soon find their way into the light. Not because of my efforts, though I would never stop trying, but because one brave child decided that silence had cost too much. And truth, no matter how painful, was the only path forward. Healing often begins with breaking, with shattering what seems solid to reveal what lies beneath. For us, that breaking came on a Tuesday afternoon in February, 20 months after Hannah's death, a day that began like any other and ended with everything changed. I was at home when the phone rang. Mrs. Caldwell? An unfamiliar woman's voice. This is Principal Matthews from Westlake Elementary. I'm calling about Lily. My heart seized. Is she all right? A pause. Physically, yes, but there's been an incident. Lily shared some concerning information with her teacher today. We've notified the authorities, but Lily asked specifically that we call you as well. What did she say? My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I think it's best if you come to the school. We're keeping both children here until social services arrives. I've never driven so fast in my life. Traffic lights and stop signs barely registered. All I could think was, someone finally believed them. At the school, I was taken to the principal's office. Lily sat in an oversized chair, a school counselor beside her. When she saw me, she launched herself into my arms with such force it nearly knocked me over. Grandma, she sobbed. Grandma, I told. I'm sorry, I told. I held her close, feeling her bird-like bones through her sweater. You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing at all. The adults in the room exchanged glances. The principal spoke gently. Lily shared with her teacher that there are things happening at home that frighten her, that her uncle hurts them sometimes, and that they're not allowed to tell anyone. Lily's small body trembled against mine. He said you'd die if we told, that old people die when they get too upset. The cruelty of that threat, using her fear of losing me after losing her mother, broke something inside me. Rage, pure and cleansing, swept through my body. Where's Noah? I asked. With another counselor, the principal explained. He was reluctant to speak at first, but after Lily came forward. The details emerged slowly, painfully. Richard's discipline, physical abuse disguised as reasonable punishment, emotional manipulation, isolation tactics, food withheld as control. The children's belongings, especially items connecting them to their mother or to me, destroyed or hidden as consequences. Some revelations were mercifully absent, Whatever horrors I had imagined in my darkest moments had not, it seemed, come to pass, but what had happened was damaging enough. When the social worker arrived, she was different from the one who had dismissed my concerns months earlier. This woman listened intently, took detailed notes, and spoke directly to the children with respect and care. "You're very brave," she told Lily, "both of you, and you're not going back there today." Noah arrived, escorted by his counselor. He looked terrified, then disbelieving when he saw me. "It's okay," Lily told him, suddenly sounding much older than her 8 years. "I told Grandma everything. She still loves us." His face crumpled then, the stoic mask finally breaking. I held both children as they cried for all they'd endured, for the relief of speaking, for the fear of what would come next. The social worker explained the process. Emergency removal, temporary custody, investigation, possible criminal charges, legal proceedings that would take months. "Where will they go?" I asked, though I knew the answer I wanted. "Given the circumstances and their expressed wishes, we'd like to place them with you temporarily while we conduct a home study. Would you be willing?" Would I be willing? To fulfill my promise to my daughter? To reclaim my grandchildren from the monster who had stolen them? To begin healing the wounds inflicted in my absence? "Yes," I said. "They belong with me. They always have." The next hours passed in a blur. Police officers arrived. Statements were taken. My apartment was quickly inspected for immediate suitability. Paperwork signed. Through it all, I kept the children close, afraid they might disappear again if I let go. When we finally left the school, a police car was headed to Richard's house, their house, Hannah's house, with a search warrant. What they would find there would later become evidence. Journals Noah had hidden beneath floorboards documenting the abuse. Medications Richard had used to keep them compliant during my visits. Hannah's possessions, locked away in the attic, not discarded as he'd claimed. My tiny apartment wasn't prepared for children. We stopped for essentials, toothbrushes, pajamas, comfort items. The social worker accompanied us, making sure the children had what they needed for the night. That first evening together was quiet, fragile, both children startled at small noises. Both asked permission before using the bathroom, before sitting on furniture, conditioned responses that broke my heart. We ate soup and sandwiches. I made up the couch and my bed with fresh sheets. When it was time to sleep, neither child would stay alone. They ended up in my queen bed, one on either side of me, holding my hands even in sleep. In the darkness, Lily whispered, "Is he going to take us back?" "No, sweetheart," I promised. "Never again. But he's our guardian. The judge said so." I stroked her hair gently. "The judge didn't know the truth then. Now people know. And I will fight with everything I have to keep you safe." It wouldn't be that simple, of course. Nothing involving courts and trauma ever is. But in that moment, I needed her to believe in safety again, in promises kept. Richard was arrested the following day. The charges were numerous: child endangerment, assault, fraud for misusing Hannah's insurance money and my savings. The house was put in receivership, pending investigation. The children didn't have to see him, didn't have to testify in person. Their statements, recorded with child advocates present, were damning enough. In the weeks that followed, we established new routines. Therapy appointments, meetings with victim advocates, quiet evenings playing board games or reading things they'd been denied in Richard's care. Food issues emerged, both children hoarding snacks, hiding them under mattresses and in drawers. Fear that still shadowed them, the worry that nourishment might again be withheld as punishment. I never restricted their eating, never commented when I found crackers tucked into shoes or cereal in coat pockets. Instead, I kept shelves stocked, accessible. Showed them repeatedly that hunger would never be weaponized in my home. Sleep came hard, nightmares frequently. I learned to wake to the smallest sounds, a whimper, a caught breath, learned to soothe without startling, to reassure without overwhelming. We moved to a larger apartment after 2 months, once my temporary custody was extended. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony where we planted flowers in pots. Not Hannah's house, but somewhere we could begin again. Richard eventually pleaded guilty, to reduce charges, accepting a plea deal that kept the children from having to appear in court. 5 years in prison, permanent termination of guardianship, restitution that would never be fully paid. When the judge officially granted me full legal guardianship, the children were present. Noah, now 11, asked a question that revealed how deeply Richard's poison had penetrated. "What happens when you get too old, Grandma? Who takes care of us then?" I knelt to his level, meeting his eyes directly. "I have arranged everything. If anything happens to me, you have Aunt Susan, my niece, who had become a steady presence in our new life. You have a whole support system now. You will never be alone again, never be with someone who hurts you." He nodded, not fully believing perhaps, but wanting to. Trust would take time. Safety would need to be proven again and again. As we left the courthouse, Lily held my hand tightly. "Can we go home now?" Home. Such a simple word for what we were rebuilding together. Not a place so much as a feeling. Security, belonging, love without conditions or costs. "Yes," I told her, "we're going home." Trauma doesn't heal in a straight line. It heals in spirals, in waves, in sudden storms and unexpected calms. There are days of progress followed by weeks of retreat, moments of joy interrupted by flashbacks, nightmares that come just when you think they've gone for good. This is what I learned in the years after bringing Noah and Lily home. 3 months after gaining permanent guardianship, Noah had what his therapist called a regression episode. It started with a man at the grocery store who looked vaguely like Richard, same height, similar haircut. Noah froze in the cereal aisle, then began hyperventilating, certain that Richard had returned to take them away again. It took 2 hours in the store manager's office, multiple phone calls to his therapist, and finally Lily's steady presence to bring him back to reality. "Uncle Rich is in prison," she told him firmly. "Grandma showed us the papers. Remember? He's locked up for 4 more years, 11 months, and 8 days. She'd been counting. Of course she had. The episode reminded us how fragile recovery can be, how healing isn't something you achieve but something you practice, daily, with setbacks alongside victories. We established new family rituals to replace the toxic ones Richard had created. Sunday dinners like we'd had when Hannah was alive. Photo albums brought out regularly, memories of their mother kept vivid and present. Their artwork displayed proudly, not criticized or destroyed as it had been under Richard's rule. Lily struggled with abandonment fears. For months, she needed to know where I was at all times, calling from school during lunch breaks just to hear my voice. She slept with her door open, needing to see the light from the hallway, to know escape was possible. Noah's trauma manifested differently. He became fiercely protective of both Lily and me, inserting himself between us and perceived threats. He researched security systems online, checked locks 3 times before bed. At 12, he carried the hypervigilance of someone much older, someone who had learned the hard way that safety could be an illusion. "No one's going to hurt us again," he'd say, a mantra repeated with such conviction it sometimes worried me. His therapist called it a control response, his way of reclaiming power after feeling so powerless. School presented its own challenges. Both children had fallen behind academically during their time with Richard, not because they lacked intelligence, but because education had become secondary to survival. Meetings with teachers, specialized tutoring, countless hours at the kitchen table working through assignments all became part of our new normal. There were whispers, of course. Small towns harbor secrets poorly. Other parents who knew fragments of our story. Children who asked insensitive questions. "Is it true your uncle went to jail? Did he really lock you in closets?" We moved schools once, seeking fresher ground. A place where their history wasn't written on every face that turned to watch them in hallways. The financial aftermath proved nearly as challenging as the emotional one. Richard had systematically drained Hannah's estate and my savings. The insurance money meant for the children's future had vanished into accounts we couldn't trace. The house, their home with Hannah, was eventually sold to pay legal fees and debts Richard had accumulated in Hannah's name. I took a part-time job at the library, something I could manage at my age while still being available for the children. We lived modestly but without the deprivation Richard had imposed as punishment. The distinction mattered, choosing simplicity versus having necessities withheld as control. My niece Susan became our strongest ally. 10 years younger than me, with grown children of her own, she provided respite care when I needed rest. Became the emergency contact when my arthritis flared too badly to drive. Promised to take the children if anything happened to me. A promise documented legally this time, with no room for someone like Richard to manipulate the system again. "You're not alone in this," she reminded me often. "None of you are." That made all the difference. The isolation Richard had engineered had been his most powerful weapon. Breaking that isolation became our most important defense. 2 years after regaining custody, we hit a milestone I hadn't dared hope for. Lily laughed without immediately looking guilty. A full, uninhibited belly laugh at a silly movie we were watching. The sound filled our small living room like sunshine breaking through clouds. Noah noticed too. I saw him watching his sister, a cautious smile on his own face. Progress, even if small, light finding its way through cracks in the darkness. Therapy continued, evolving as they grew. Individual sessions. Family counseling where we learned to communicate fears without shame. Support groups where they met other children whose trust had been betrayed by adults who should have protected them. Healing looks different for everyone. For Lily, it came through art paintings that started dark and chaotic, gradually giving way to color and form. For Noah, through physical activity running track until exhaustion, left no room for the anxious thoughts that plagued him. For me, healing meant forgiveness, not of Richard, never that but of myself. The hardest work was letting go of the guilt that ate at me during sleepless nights. The endless replay of moments when I should have seen, should have known, should have fought harder. "You did fight for us, Grandma," Noah told me once, wise beyond his 13 years. "Maybe not perfectly, but you never stopped. That's what matters." From the mouths of children, sometimes, comes the grace we cannot give ourselves. By the time Lily turned 12 and Noah 14, we had established a life that, while marked by our shared trauma, was no longer defined by it. We spoke of Hannah freely, celebrating her birthday each year with her favorite cake and stories. We acknowledged what Richard had done without letting it occupy the center of our existence. When Richard was released from prison after serving his sentence, we were notified as was legally required. The children were old enough by then to understand their rights. A restraining order was granted without contest. He moved to another state, and we breathed easier knowing state lines and legal documents created boundaries he couldn't cross. There were still hard days, anniversaries, triggers that couldn't always be anticipated. Noah's first serious girlfriend brought questions about healthy relationships that required careful navigation. Lily's transition to middle school revived separation anxiety temporarily. But there were beautiful days too. Noah's first science fair victory, Lily making the honor roll after years of academic struggle. Small celebrations that Hannah would have treasured that I treasured doubly in her absence. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Lily asked on her 13th birthday, as we looked through old photographs. "Beyond measure," I told her. "She sees the strength in you both, the resilience." "I'm not always strong," she confessed. "That's part of being human, sweetheart. No one is strong all the time. But you keep going, keep trying. That's what matters." As they grew into teenagers, new challenges emerged. The normal adolescent pushing of boundaries collided with trauma histories in complicated ways. Both needed room to develop independence, yet both still carried fears of abandonment and betrayal that made separation anxiety a recurring issue. Their therapist helped us navigate these waters. "Let them practice trust in safe ways," she advised. "Small freedoms, gradually increased. Consistent returns to home base. Predictability is healing." So we created systems, check-in texts that weren't about control but connection, clear expectations about curfews and whereabouts that came with explanations, not just rules. The difference between Richard's arbitrary restrictions and healthy boundaries was something we discussed openly. Noah discovered programming in high school, losing himself for hours in code that made sense when people often didn't. Lily joined theater, finding voices on stage when her own sometimes felt too small. I watched them grow, these survivors, these children of my child. saw how they carried their history not as a weight that drowned them but as an awareness that made them uniquely compassionate, fiercely loyal to those they let into their circle of trust. By the time college approached for Noah, we had built something I once thought impossible in those dark days after Richard's arrest, a family remade, scarred but whole, different than what Hannah had envisioned, perhaps, but founded on the same love she would have given them. "I'm scared to leave," Noah admitted the night before moving into his dorm. "What if Lily needs me? What if you do?" "We'll miss you terribly," I told him honestly. "But we'll be okay. You've helped build something strong here. It won't collapse when you step away to grow." He nodded, understanding what I was really saying. Richard hadn't won. The fear he had planted hadn't taken permanent root. Noah could leave not because he didn't care, but because he trusted in our stability enough to spread his wings. The day we moved him into his freshman dorm, Lily helped arrange his books on shelves, while I made his bed with the precision only grandmothers seem to manage. Before we left, Noah hugged us both longer than usual. "Thank you," he whispered to me, "for saving us." "We saved each other," I corrected gently. And that, perhaps, is the truest thing about healing. It happens in community, in connections that remind us we are worthy of love, capable of trust, deserving of safety. In relationships that prove, day after patient day, that not all touch hurts, not all love comes with conditions, not all family betrays. Healing isn't linear. It moves in circles, sometimes returning us to old pain before spiraling outward again toward growth. But if we keep moving, keep holding on to each other, the circle widens. The pain becomes just one part of a larger story. Not the end. Not even the most important part. Just a chapter in a longer tale of what it means to be human, broken and mended, scarred and beautiful, wounded and, ultimately, whole. Today, I am 83. My hands shake sometimes when I pour tea. My memories occasionally blur at the edges, except for those years after Hannah died. Those remain crystal clear, etched into my mind like carvings in stone. Time has a strange way of distilling experience, reducing some moments to faint impressions while preserving others with painful clarity. The sound of Richard's voice still sends ice through my veins when it surfaces unexpectedly in dreams. The sight of a child flinching from an adult's raised hand in public still stops my breath. Noah is 32 now, a software engineer with 2 children of his own. His son has Hannah's eyes, her questioning gaze. His daughter has her laugh, that same unrestrained joy that bubbles up from somewhere deep and true. Noah is a careful father, attentive in ways that speak to his own history. He checks doors twice, maintains security systems, insists on knowing where his children are at all times. But he's found balance too, learned to protect without controlling, to care without suffocating. The legacy of fear that Richard planted hasn't disappeared entirely, but Noah has transformed it into something healthier. Vigilance without paranoia, caution without terror. Lily teaches elementary school at 29, specializing in working with traumatized children. She has an uncanny ability to spot the quiet ones, the ones hiding pain behind compliance or aggression. "I recognize the signals," she told me once. "I know what it looks like when a child is carrying something too heavy." She's unmarried still, cautious about relationships in a way that sometimes worries me. But she dates occasionally, bringing home men she introduces carefully, watching my reaction as though my approval might reveal something her own judgment missed. The wariness may never leave her entirely, but neither has it hardened into isolation. She connects deeply with her chosen family friends who've earned her trust through years of consistency and respect. They both live within an hour's drive. They both call more than their busy lives should reasonably allow. Sunday dinners continue, now hosted in Noah's home, with its sprawling backyard where his children play without fear, without looking over their shoulders. We speak of Hannah freely, sharing stories that keep her memory alive for a generation that never knew her. And sometimes, when the conversation naturally turns that way, we speak of Richard too, not with the power he once held over us, but as a chapter closed, a lesson learned at terrible cost. They've healed in ways I once couldn't imagine possible. Not completely, there are still moments, triggers, dreams that wake them in the night. Noah still struggles with trusting authority figures. Lily still panics momentarily when someone doesn't answer her call right away. But wholeness doesn't mean the absence of scars. It means finding purpose despite them, perhaps even because of them. It means building lives where trauma informs but doesn't dictate choices. It means breaking cycles that could so easily repeat themselves. I tell this story not to dwell in pain but to illuminate something essential about protection. It requires vigilance. It demands that we see clearly, even when the truth is uncomfortable. It asks us to believe that subtle warning signs matter, that small discomforts should be heeded rather than dismissed. Richard was not a stranger in an alley, not a shadowy figure easily recognized as dangerous. He was family. He smiled. He offered help when we were drowning in grief. His methods were subtle at first, reasonable-sounding explanations, small changes that seemed insignificant in isolation. He knew exactly how much to take at once, never so much that the theft was obvious until it was too late. The boundaries he crossed moved incrementally, each one seemingly defensible on its own. That's how predators often work. They count on our politeness, our benefit of the doubt, our reluctance to name what we're seeing when it conflicts with who we want someone to be. They count on our denial, the human tendency to normalize what should alarm us, to rationalize what should repel us. They insert themselves in moments of vulnerability, presenting as saviors while laying groundwork for control. In the decades since we escaped Richard's grip, I've studied similar cases with an almost obsessive attention. I've read court transcripts, psychological studies, survivor accounts. I've corresponded with other grandparents who fought to protect their grandchildren from abusive guardians. The patterns repeat with eerie similarity across different circumstances. The isolation, the financial control, the rewriting of family narratives, the calculated destruction of mementos and connections to the past, the psychological manipulation of children already traumatized by loss. If you're raising children or have children in your life, remember this. Listen to the whispers of instinct. Question authority figures who isolate. Watch for behavioral changes that have no satisfying explanation. Document patterns that disturb you, even if you can't articulate why. Share your concerns with others who might see what you're missing. Create networks of oversight where no single person has unchecked control over a child's well-being. And most importantly, believe children when they speak. Create safe spaces where they can tell hard truths without fear. Let them know you will stand beside them, not above them, when they reveal what's happened behind closed doors. A child who is heard is harder to silence. A child who is believed is harder to manipulate. A child who knows they have allies is harder to isolate. Hannah would have done this perfectly, I think. She had a clarity I sometimes lacked, a fierceness about protecting her children that came as naturally as breathing. She would have seen through Richard's facade immediately, recognized the predatory intent behind his offers of help. I've often wondered if her death was what made them vulnerable, not just through the obvious loss of their mother and primary protector, but through my own compromised judgment in grief. Would I have been more alert, more discerning, if my daughter hadn't just died? Would I have fought harder from the beginning if sorrow hadn't depleted my resources so completely? These questions have no answers, only the hollow echo of what cannot be changed. My grandchildren have forgiven me for what happened. For not seeing sooner, not fighting harder, not preventing their suffering. You did the best you could with what you understood then, Lily told me on my 80th birthday. And when you knew better, you did better. That's all any of us can do. Their grace humbles me daily. I haven't fully forgiven myself. Perhaps I never will. The image of Noah's bruised wrists, of Lily's haunted eyes, of precious years stolen from all of us, these things cannot be undone, cannot be atoned for completely. But I've learned to live with that unresolved chord, to let it be part of the music of our shared life, without letting it drown out the sweeter notes that have come after. There is beauty in what we've rebuilt together. In Sunday dinners where laughter flows freely, in the way Noah's children run to me without hesitation, without the wariness that once shadowed his own eyes. In how Lily calls just to share small moments of her day, the casual intimacy that was once carefully policed, now flowing naturally between us. In the knowledge that what was broken has been repaired, not perfectly, not without visible seams, but with strength at the mended places. If this story resonates with you, If it raises questions about someone in your life or someone in a child's life, don't look away. Don't dismiss your concerns, because confronting them would be messy or difficult or socially awkward. Don't assume other adults will intervene if you don't. Don't wait for proof beyond reasonable doubt before taking protective action. By the time such proof exists, irreparable harm may already have occurred. The cost of looking away is paid by the most vulnerable among us, by children who cannot protect themselves, by families shattered when silence allows harm to flourish, by communities broken by the betrayal of trust. The damage ripples outward, touching lives for generations, unless the cycle is deliberately, courageously broken. Listen, watch, speak, act. These are not just words, but commitments we make to one another, especially to those who depend on us most. They are the foundation of protection, not perfect protection, for nothing is perfect in this world, but the best defense we have against those who would exploit vulnerability for their own purposes. My time with Noah and Lily grows shorter now, as is the way of things. I find myself looking backward more often, assessing the arc of our story. There is grief there, yes, for Hannah, for the childhood her children should have had, for years we cannot reclaim. But there is triumph, too. In the family we've managed to preserve, despite everything that sought to destroy it. In the healing that happened not because of what we suffered, but because of what we chose to do with that suffering. I will leave them knowing I kept my final promise to their mother. They remember her. They know they were loved fiercely, by her and by me. They understand that family, true family, protects, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They know the difference between control disguised as care and love that genuinely seeks their highest good. And they know something else, something Richard could never erase, no matter how he tried. They belong to themselves. Their stories are their own to write. Their futures stretch before them, not unmarked by the past, but not limited by it either. They have built lives that honor their mother's memory and defy the intentions of the man who sought to possess them. They have, in the most meaningful sense, won. If you've stayed with me through this telling, I thank you. Bearing witness matters. Sharing these truths matters. Perhaps somewhere, someone reading this will recognize a Richard in their midst before damage is done. Perhaps somewhere, a child will be spared because someone remembered this story and found the courage to speak. Perhaps somewhere, a family teetering on the edge of destruction will be pulled back to safety because someone recognized the pattern and intervened. That is my hope. That is why, at 83, I break decades of silence, not to harm, but to heal, not to accuse, but to protect, not to dwell in the past, but to change what might yet be prevented. Remember this, if nothing else. Evil rarely announces itself. It smiles. It helps when you're vulnerable. It isolates slowly, carefully, with explanations ready. It makes you doubt your own perceptions until you no longer trust yourself to tell truth from lies. Watch for it, name it, stand against it. The children are counting on us.